So, hi everyone, and today I wanted to talk about a subject which we haven't actually talked about here yet on this school before, and that is why barefoot fails. And no, I'm not really going to talk about what you think I might be talking about, because barefoot can and do succeed for so many horses and so many people. But what I really want to discuss today is why it fails, why it can fail, and what can cause it to fail. Because I think it's important as a group, as barefoot horse owners and barefoot horse carers, that we regularly assess why we are doing what we are doing, and what could cause it to not go in the horse's favor. Barefoot fails because people just don't know. They just don't know what goes into creating a barefoot horse. There's a big difference between a functional, working, barefoot animal and a horse without shoes. Just because they are shoeless doesn't mean that they are barefoot yet. Everything has to be working in your favor if you want to have a barefoot horse that can work, meaning they can train, they can ride on the footing that you have access to, that they are sound, they are comfortable, and that they are happy, and that they are not experiencing any discomfort while they are working. And this is not an easy thing to do, because you cannot simply pull off the shoes, do a couple of trims, and hope for the best and expect that the horse will be fine. Some horses, the shoes can come off and they will be sound immediately. Most horses are not. If you're going to take shoes off a horse, most of them are not going to be sound for training and riding immediately, or even for months or even years after the shoes come off. And then there's that big question: if the horse is not sound without shoes, were they ever sound to begin with? The horse needs to be sound without the shoes. The function of the hoof, the form, the shape, the trim, whether you're shoeing or not, needs to be correct underneath that shoe for that horse to be sound. Typically, people are shoeing horses so that they can work them on abrasive or hard surfaces without causing them to be lame. Well, some people shoe horses because that's what has always been done, and that's what everybody else does, so they shoe as well. Those of us who do shoe consciously, we do it to protect our horses. And if you wanted to work horses in the same environment without shoes, how do you do this? Firstly, you have to have a correct diet. So you cannot trim your way out of a diet problem. A barefoot horse needs a barefoot correct diet. It just so happens that a barefoot appropriate diet is also an equine species appropriate diet. So they need access to good quality forage that is appropriate for a horse, meaning very low in non-structural carbohydrates. So the sugar fraction, the starches, the fructans, all of this portion, it needs to be not sweet. And it needs to be available all the time in a highly digestible format. There is an intrinsic connection between grains or sweet feeds and foot sore horses. There is an intrinsic chain reaction biologically in a horse when they eat a sweet feed, even sweet hay, even sweet grass, that will cause tenderness in their hooves. And in my online course for Barefoot Basics, I dive into that in more detail. I explain that chain reaction on a scientific level. So they need to be grain-free, and they need to have enough vitamins and minerals and protein so that this animal can grow good, strong, healthy keratin structures. This includes mane and tail, fur, but primarily the feet. They need enough nutrients so that they are growing good feet. Some horses will take 6 months, some will take 9, some will take 12 to grow an entirely new hoof capsule from top to bottom. And the positive diet changes you might make, it might take up to 12 months for that horse to grow a healthier, harder, sounder barefoot hoof. Are you willing to wait that long for your horse to grow a sound barefoot hoof whilst you put on the shelf your riding, your horsemanship, your training ambitions, whilst you're waiting for that horse to grow an appropriate, strong hoof? Are you willing to take the time it takes? If they didn't have an appropriate diet, and then you make a diet change, and then you get a barefoot trimmer and you pull the shoes and you do 2 or 3 trims, and then after 2 or 3 trims, you are confused why your horse is tender on rocky footing, I'm here to tell you that your confusion is related to a lack of information. This is why I'm making this video, to give you that information, because it's going to take time. 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Each horse will sort of grow different time. Some will grow really quick, some will grow slowly, but it's going to take that long for a stronger hoof to grow in. Because if they had a weak diet for 1 year, if they had a weak diet for 6 months, then that portion of the hoof that grew during that poor diet is going to be weak. It's going to display functional difficulties. It's not going to grow correctly. It's going to grow atrophied. It's going to grow with thrush. It's going to have a myriad of issues. It'll be more likely to bruise. It'll be more likely to chip, more likely to split, and you're going to have problems. So diet. Diet is so important for a barefoot horse. The diet has to be spot on. But if you're a detail-orientated person and you're really interested in species-appropriate horsekeeping, it just so happens that a barefoot-appropriate diet is also a highly correct horse diet, meaning according to the latest scientific information about what horses need to be eating, a barefoot correct diet will be a correct balanced diet, whether you're barefoot or not. So the argument is that whether you're barefoot or not, all horses should have a species-appropriate diet. Second is trim. You've got to have the right trim. And not all blacksmiths or farriers, meaning a hoof care provider who is trained in the art and the skill and the technique of metal working and applying the metal to the hooves. This is a blacksmith or a farrier. They will not necessarily be highly skilled in the barefoot trimming world. There are so many different schools of thought in relation to correct barefoot hooves, but there are a few things that we all agree upon as barefoot trimmers. There are a few very key, very fundamental things about trimming a barefoot hoof that all the schools tend to agree upon. And in my Barefoot Basics online course, I've really tried to present a trim that focuses on those fundamentals that tend to be agreed upon across a broad spectrum of schools of thought. So that's sort of where I'm sitting. I'm not picking sides. I am fence sitting here. But we do agree that the way you trim a barefoot hoof is very, 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 very different to the way you trim a hoof that's about to have metal applied to it. Iron peripheral loading device, a shoe. The way you prepare a hoof to have a shoe is, in some cases, the antithesis of how you prepare a hoof barefoot. So if you've got yourself a farrier who went to blacksmithing school, they may or may not have detailed information about how to prepare a hoof for barefoot. They're a hoof expert and they know hooves inside out, but they might not necessarily know how to prepare the hoof to be barefoot. Some of them do, and some of them are amazing. I've met some amazing farriers who really knew their way around a barefoot trim, and I've met some farriers who, if I needed to get my horse shod, I'd call them in a heartbeat. I would trust them implicitly, but their barefoot trim just wasn't up to par with wanting a horse that can work barefoot. If you don't have access to the right professional, learn to do it yourself. And it's been our experience here in the hoof school that more or less everyone who subscribes within 1 or 2 trims is doing as good, if not better, care in their trimming on their horse's hoof than their prior paid professional. That tends to be the reoccurring storyline. Next, you want lifestyle. The lifestyle of that horse has to be barefoot appropriate and essentially movement. That horse needs to move, and they need to move when you're not training them, because you might train them for 2, 3, or 4 hours a day if you're lucky to go and ride or walk them in hand for 2 or 3, 4 hours a day. Most of us don't have that kind of time, especially if horses are a hobby or a recreation for you. You usually don't have that kind of time. You might have 30 minutes, you might have 1 hour to move that animal. But if you've got a barefoot horse and they're not moving very much at all when you're not there, that horse will struggle to work with you barefoot. And I know this from personal experience. And I've always tried to seek out horse keeping environments that encouraged movement. But even the best paddock paradise track system pales in comparison to what horses have been evolutionarily designed to do. Horses are the only living monodactyl, meaning single-digited animal. Essentially, horses are walking on a single finger, so they're evolutionarily an outlier. They need constant movement. They were designed to move at a walk across abrasive surfaces for 16 to 20 hours of the day. That is what the hoof has evolved for. Now, if you've got a paddock paradise system, if you don't know what a paddock paradise system is, it is something that was coined by a great man called Jamie Jackson, who discovered that instead of keeping horses in square paddocks, we should be fencing off the center, essentially, of those paddocks, creating a track around the exterior, spreading out resources along that track, which encouraged or forced these horses to move all day in between resources. So shelter, food, water, salt, they're able to move in between these resources. If you can get your horse in a domestic setting moving 6 to 10 kilometers a day on their own in a domestic setting, where we're approaching something good in terms of barefoot hoof keeping. If you're able to get them when you're not training to move 6 to 10 kilometers a day, then you're going to be really cooking with gas with your barefoot hooves. They should be tough, they should be calloused, they should be strong, they should be self-trimming. It means you'll need your trimmer less. It means that you will be riding more because they'll be more comfortable. It means they'll be more resilient, these hooves. They'll tolerate wet-dry cycles. They'll tolerate more work. But if your hooves are only moving 2 kilometers a day, 3 kilometers a day outside of a training environment, you're going to have problems. These hooves are not going to be tough. They're not going to be calloused. They're not going to be robust enough, and you're going to have a horse who's footsore, especially if you get them on very rugged footing. So the environment has to be spot on. And in the online course, again, this is something I'm diving into in more depth about explaining exactly what a barefoot horse keeping environment can look like. You don't need a lot of space. You just need to look at things a little bit differently and put some effort into designing it out well and sticking to it. So you've got the diet, you've got the trim, you've got the lifestyle, and then you've got owner responsibility or the daily care. As a hoof care provider, there's only so much I can do with horses that are not my own. If it's my own horse, I'm responsible for the daily activity of picking up the legs, picking them out, and checking the general hoof integrity. That is my responsibility. But when I'm not there, the owner or the leaser or the rider, the people who are involved in the care of that animal, it is their responsibility to make sure that the hoof is cared for correctly. And a barefoot hoof, like all hooves, requires freedom from standing in mud, freedom from standing in their own feces. Feces and mud will only destroy your hooves. There is not much I can do with a hoof that's standing in feces and mud. They just won't be sound barefoot. They just won't. Then you need to take into account soil acidity. In some countries, like we know on the hoof school, where there's many different countries represented there, some countries have highly acidic soil that literally eats away at hooves. So you need to control that if you're in an acidic environment. But the hooves need to be cleaned daily. Have a hoof pick and a wire brush and a bottle of vinegar and use it daily, and you're already doing great things for your hooves. So I can't do that if I'm just your hoof care provider. You need to be doing that for your own horses. And if, as a hoof care provider, I make a recommendation such as this horse isn't moving enough in their environment, please do some groundwork with them. Please ride them at a walk or take them for walks 3-4 days a week for 20 minutes, half an hour, just to get the hooves working. Or please apply this product, please pick them out daily. If I make those recommendations and they're not adhered to, and then the horse is not sound, my hands are clean. It is up to both of us to cooperate and to work hard, because barefoot is hard work. It's really hard work. It's as hard as a farrier putting a shoe on and then everything that goes around caring for a shod horse. It's as hard, if not maybe harder in some places in this world, to keep sound working barefoot horses. If you know something about pain science, especially pain science in relationship to horses, I recommend the Kathy Sierra course on pain science in horses. It's amazing, but she really goes into it. You know that pain does not equal damage. There are no pain receptors in mammals. Mammals don't have pain receptors in their tissues. What we have is a nervous system that detects where it thinks there might be damage. So pain is a neurological, meaning it's in your brain. Pain is a neurological response to where the body thinks there might be damage. So if your horse is in pain, it means neurologically they think there might be damage in their hooves. This does not mean that there is damage in their hooves. It means the brain thinks there might be damage there, and there is very good science to back up what I'm saying. There is more than a few scientific examples where people have been admitted to the ER with huge traumas that they perceived were there, and then when the doctor went in to explore the trauma, found that there was no bodily harm to be found, and yet this person was experiencing huge amounts of pain, unresponsive to painkillers like morphine, and yet the pain was real because the nervous system had suspected, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, that there was damage there. But there wasn't. So even though your horse is footsore, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something inherently wrong with the hooves, that they're about to blow up. It might not. And this is why it is so confusing, because barefoot hoof care can be a little bit like reading tea leaves in a cup. So if you're someone who doesn't do well in ambiguous situations where information is up to your interpretation, where information can be ambiguous, maybe barefoot's not for you, and you should shoe your horses where slap a shoe on, no more questions asked, go and ride. But if you've got a barefoot horse and they're transitioning to be barefoot and they are footsore, and you've done all the steps, diet, trim, lifestyle, and your responsibility, your daily care, you've done all of these steps and the horse is still footsore, then what you need to do is to train them and condition them. It means that the horse needs low impact, long distance, slow work and training across multiple different surfaces so that they can learn to have confidence in their new feet, which feel different without shoes on, and they need time to adjust to this new feeling. So, Having said all of that, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from getting involved in barefoot. I just want people to know what goes into the failure of a barefoot hoof and what needs to be done to ensure that your barefoot hooves are sound, that your horse is pain-free and comfortable when they're working.